Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Raghav. I am the climate change and ESG lead for at Orville Consulting. So today we're going to talk about a climate story that should hopefully, by the end of it, give you all a good idea as to where climate regulation formulated from and some insights into where we might be going. There are some regulations underway that I've tried to highlight to the best of my ability, uh, although not finalized. So, if you have any questions, uh, please, I'll have three pauses in the middle where I'll be requesting questions, so you could share them at that point. Or if you put it in the chat box, I'll be happy to take them at the end of the presentation as well. Um, and yeah, with that, let's start. We still do have some people joining, but I think uh, we should go ahead in the interest of time. So thank you everyone for being here. So to start off with, just I think a very vague history, but just to let you know, so in the 19th century is where the emergence of early scientific studies on climate change actually started, where scientists began to observe changes in temperature and weather patterns, and it coincided with the industrial revolution. It's where initial signs of climate change were first detected. Post that in the 20th century is when scientists actually began to connect or formulate the relationship between climate, between greenhouse gases, particularly carbon, and the changes that we were seeing in our climate, significant ones, and correlating those to particular consequences as well. Um, so of course, post that, recent studies have and modern modeling and other mechanisms have really connected climate change to a vast variety of global disasters that we are looking at right now, from floods, sea level rise, extreme weather events, and also have connected that to the fact that I'm connected that to anthropogenic activities or human activities, and have shown us where we can act to kind of mitigate climate change. So of course, this is not something that's happening at an individual level. There have been there has been a push from an international government level to kind of get this going and especially reach the point where we are today. So, where did it start, right? So, let me see if I can give you a good understanding of where we are. So, about 300 years ago, is represented the amount of carbon in our atmosphere from about 300 years ago is what's represented in this graph today, correlating to which countries have emitted their particular annual emissions. So you can see that China, USA, and India are at the top in terms today in terms of their annual emissions. And it tends to be that these are the numbers that kind of come out, which country is emitting the most. But in terms of uh, looking at who is responsible, it's being that held slightly more accountable than the other countries who are right now in a developmental stage. Right. So I just spoke about responsibility, but when we look at impact, it's not really the same story. It's not the countries that have are more responsible are facing the larger impact. It's actually the other way around. So the table you see in front of you actually talks about climate change risk by different scenarios. So from a 2-degree scenario to a 3.2-degree scenario, we can see what the impact is to each country's economy. So as we can see for Asian countries, which is India, China, mostly South Asia, there is a risk of up to 37.4% of a decrease in our GDP due to impacts of climate change. So there is a very clear economic risk and not just a social and environmental risk. I think we are quite aware and at this point of what the social and economic, the environmental risks are, but there is a very clear economic risk as well. And at that point, I mean, economic risk is something that can be quantified and used from a government perspective to clearly take action. It can also be quantified at an international level in terms of what we spoke about before as responsibility. So moving forward from here, we'll see how these two have formulated this climate journey that we've had from about the early 1980s into 2024, where we are right now. So hopefully, by the end of the first part of my presentation, you should have a good enough idea of all the things that you're seeing on your screen today. So this is just an introductory slide. I'll go into each one of these. So to start off with, I'd like to ask you all if anyone can guess what these logos are for. Um, I mean, not made it too difficult, but if anybody knows uh, what IPCC is, what the other logo is on the top right. If anyone is willing to take a guess. Okay, I guess, okay, then we'll move ahead. But,
There is a message.
ah, sorry, on the chat. UNFCCC, yes, perfect. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Thank you. Thank you, Harpreet and Rahul. Exactly. I think most people should be aware or should have at some point heard about UNFCCC for sure, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The IPCC maybe not as much. Um, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. So a lot of most of us have heard about these in very different capacities, maybe. But I'm going to go into kind of giving you an idea of what exactly these are, how they formed, and what they mean. Right? So, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement. So a lot of these words, um, convention, panel, protocol, agreement, sometimes I hear them being interchanged, used very vaguely. But so I thought I would highlight what these terms mean particularly. So of course, so I've not put panel here. Panel basically is a scientific panel. So we have like members, part of the panel who um, scientists who can give updates from a scientific perspective, and we'll go into what IPCC does. But just now to share some perspective um, between a convention, protocol, and agreement. So the UNFCCC is a convention, and it's synonymous with the term treaty. So a convention and treaty are quite similar. It basically refers to a formal agreement between multilateral treaties, so multi international organizations and usually between a wide range of parties at an international level, right? So the UNFCCC is an example of a convention, um, and it's a treaty that was signed between multiple international bodies, multiple countries, right? The next thing is the protocol. So the protocol is usually a supplementary addition or an additional agreement to the convention. So it's often attached post a convention as something that is either signed on or uh, an agreement that is legally binding. So in that, the Kyoto Protocol is an example of this. So the Kyoto Protocol is under the UNFCCC, and it establishes some legally binding set of activities for the members under the UNFCCC. And the next thing we talk about is an agreement. So an agreement is a general term, so it's not usually legally binding, and it can be used as a more broad term. So the Paris Agreement in that, although not in a broad perspective, was initially brought on to get more members on board, and that was the idea behind it. So the Paris Agreement is an example of an international agreement, and it outlines global frameworks for efforts to combat climate change. So this is just an introduction. I'll go into each one. So of course, starting with IPCC. So IPCC is a scientific body, right? So it's a scientific panel under UNFCCC, and it assesses the scientific, technical, and the socio-economic information relevant to understanding climate change. So IPCC releases their reports every few years, and they go all the way from uh, general perspective on understanding things like responsibility that we spoke about before, all the way into giving out specific emissions for particular products or particular activities as well, right? So it's basically a guide at an international level for policymakers, for organizations, industries even, to refer so that everyone is on a common scientific understanding when it comes to climate change. The next is the UNFCCC. So UNFCCC was established in 1992, and the members who signed on to the convention and what the convention stated were not legally binding. Um, in that, it's an international environmental treaty, and it provides a framework for international cooperation to combat climate change, right? So in this, the first thing and the first basis is that the industrialized nations, especially at the point at 1992, when they were signing on to the convention, agreed that they would provide financial support for action on climate change, right? And this included a system of grants and loans that has been set up through a global environmental facility. So there is a fund that we'll talk about later as well. So the basic idea being that industrialized countries will agree to support developing countries with finance, with sharing advanced technology, um, in order for them to sustainably develop rather than following the same mistakes or paths that they did early in the early industrial revolution, right? So the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement are under the United Nations Framework Convention, and so the Kyoto Protocol was formed during COP3, which was in Kyoto, Japan, 11th of December 1997, and it entered into force on 16th of February 2005, and lasted up to 2022. Post this, the Paris Agreement, which entered into force in 2016, is more relevant as where we are today. So let's go into a little more about the Kyoto Protocol. So it was adopted on 11th December 1997. The Kyoto Protocol is a legally binding protocol. So all the countries that signed into the Kyoto Protocol committed finances, committed to work on uh, addressing climate change, and the actions that they committed to doing were legally binding. But the Kyoto Protocol only binds developed countries and puts a heavy burden on them, specifying the responsibility of where we are today, specifying them from uh, a particular standpoint. So we'll get into that. So they're called flexible market mechanisms. So basically, it was the idea being that the developed countries would provide funds to developing countries to take up particular activities or abate emissions, right? So, so countries have submitted their national targets under Kyoto Protocol and also committed finances under certain market-based mechanisms. And there are three particular market-based mechanisms, and we'll get into that. So the first one being international emissions trading, right? So, so under the Article 17 of the Kyoto Protocol, so countries have, if a country uh, has worked on their climate goals and has emission units to spare, meaning that they have reduced or absorbed more carbon than they have committed to, they can sell this excess capacity to countries that are struggling to meet their targets, right? And this concept under Article 17 of the Kyoto Protocol led to this commodity that we have today of carbon credits, emissions trading, and this is where it was initially kind of developed. So post this was the formulation of the Clean Development Mechanism, or CDM. So this was the first global trading platform. Basically, it was with the idea that developed countries through this platform can set up projects, set up developmental objectives in other developing countries, uh, take up the investment, implementation, etc., and earn the benefits of meeting their targets. And that's the base behind the clean development mechanism. Of course, we've gone a long way from there, and I'll get in a little bit more into the CDM mechanisms as well. The next being joint implementation. So as I spoke about under the international emissions trading, um, joint implementation allows a country with an emission reduction or other emission limitation commitment to earn emission reductions from implementing projects in other countries. Yeah. So it basically offers flexible and cost-effective means to fulfilling their Kyoto commitments. The next thing we talk about is the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement was adopted on December 12th, 2015. So the Paris Agreement is the agreement in itself is legally binding. And I'll talk about the four activities under the Paris Agreement that are legally binding. But under this, the Paris Agreement requires countries, signatories, to submit NDC commitments that are individual commitments, and these commitments are not legally binding. So just to specify this. So under the Paris Agreement, there are four legally binding components. The first one is the nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. So basically, under the Paris Agreement, all the signatories, the participating countries, are required to submit NDCs. And these NDCs have to outline their individual climate action plans and commitments and specify targets for themselves. The targets, as I mentioned, are not legally binding, but the the act of submitting the NDCs is legally binding. Um, then they also have an obligation to enhance their ambition over time, and that is legally binding as well. So the next being the transparency framework. So basically, countries that have signed up for the Paris Agreement uh, are part of a under a robust transparency framework need to submit their progress as per the framework, along with their NDCs. And they are legally bound to regularly report on these the um, activities under the transparency framework as well. So it includes greenhouse gas emissions, progress of the climate goals and actions, etc. Um, the next being the global stock take. And many of you all might have heard this, considering that COP28 was where the most recent global stock take was announced, and the document was released. So the global stock take basically is a study at an international level where we take an assessment to see collectively where how much we have progressed on our goals. This is not for individual countries. Of course, it does specify that, but as a global collective that signed up to the Paris Agreement, how much have we progressed on commitments as a whole? Again, the outcome of this stock take and what it might show about particular countries or progress in itself is not legally binding. But the act of having a global stock take is and being released is legally binding, right? So then the last one is financial contributions. So under the Paris Agreement, developed countries have committed to providing financial support to developing countries to assist them in mitigating and adapting to climate change. So uh, they are again, so under the Paris Agreement, developed countries are legally bound to support developing countries, but when they commit to particular financial contributions or amounts or certain mechanisms, those particularities are not legally binding. Um, yeah, so Yeah. So also, I think I've said legally binding and not legally binding quite a few times in the last 10 minutes. So I just want to maybe highlight what that means. Um, so basically, it's good to know what of these documents and what commitments from a country's side are going to be legally binding. But what does legally binding mean? So legally binding does not mean that some particular member of the country is going to go to jail or something like that. It particularly means that their claims can be challenged in an international court of law, but the consequences of that are not similar to the legalities that we have at an individual level, right? So the legalities particular to, let's say, the Paris Agreement, if a country does not report, um, uh, they can be challenged by the other member signatories. But the consequences are just that either they will have more stringent commitments and that will be enforced on them in the future, the COPs or the future uh, NDCs that they have to submit. And also, they will get support to additional support to work on achieving their commitment. So the reason behind this not being so strict, and it is something that is being talked about a lot right now, but the 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 nuance is that all these agreements, protocols are voluntarily signed on by countries, and the moment it becomes something that has economic consequences or really stringent legal consequences, there is a high chance that countries wouldn't sign up or will back out in the first place. With the existing commitments, financial alone, we saw that US pulled out of the Paris Agreement under the Trump administration. Of course, they're back now, but although these are legally binding, the since it's a voluntary agreement, it needs to be pushed forth in that way. So now moving forward, of course, so the Green Climate Fund. So the Green Climate Fund was established in 2010 under UNFCCC. So it's one of the mechanisms for developed countries to channel funds to support developing countries in sustainable development. So uh, the Green Climate Fund was established in COP17, and it was an operating entity of the financial mechanism of the convention in accordance with Article 11, right? So the financial mechanism is accountable to the COP, and it decides on what policies, program priorities, and criteria the funding is used for. And the main idea is to provide resources in assisting developing countries in having in developing in a low emissions and climate resilient way. The next thing I'd like to talk about is CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism. So CDM was set up in 2006, and it was under the Article 12 of the UNFCCC, and allows a country with an emission reduction or emission limitation commitment under the Kyoto Protocol to implement an emission reduction project in a developing country. So the funds will go to support the developing country in establishing uh, more advanced technologies or better systems to avoid emitting as much as the developed countries did during the Industrial Revolution. And the benefits in terms of targets for emission reductions can go to the developed countries, right? So this mechanism is overseen by the CDM Executive Board and is ultimately under the Kyoto Protocol, right? So of course you can see the CDM website. There's a lot more information about it. I'm just briefing the topic for a overall understanding and for lack of time, of course. So also I would like to go over what is a COP. So we hear COP28, COP27. There's a lot of dignitaries going there, a lot of activities happening. So what exactly is a COP? Um, so a climate COP refers to a conference of parties, right? So a conference of parties under the UNFCCC, um, and it's an annual meeting that brings together representatives from countries that are party to the convention, and they come to negotiate actions, take submit NDCs, or tackle climate change at a global scale. Um, so going a little more into details of um, what that means, right? So basically it provides a platform for countries to assess progress, negotiate agreements, and make decisions on various issues related to climate change mitigation, adaptation, finance, and technology transfer. And it serves as a forum for countries to set emission reduction targets as well, discuss climate policies, and address any challenges that they have in a collaborative way. So the COP meets every year, unless of course decided otherwise. And the first COP was held in Berlin, Germany, in March of 1995, as you can see at the bottom left of the screen. That was the image of the first of COP1. Um, and just to and image of COP28 Dubai as well. So just as the COP presidency rotates, so the COP presidency rotates among the five recognized UN regions, that's Africa, Asia, Latin America, Caribbean, Central and Eastern Europe, and Western Europe. There is a tendency for the venue also to rotate. So as you are aware, the venue rotates every year. Um, of course, you have any questions particular to that, please get back to me. So um, next thing I'd like to talk about is NDCs, nationally determined contributions. So I went over this a bit earlier, and right now I just wanted to put forth some numbers for everyone to be aware of in case you already aren't. And just for the four main countries, I think it will be relevant as we move forward in the presentation. So the first one being USA has set a climate neutrality target of 2050, EU also of 2050, India of 2070, and China of 2060. And the dates beside that are the dates on which these targets were announced. Besides this, countries have also set short-term targets. So as we can see, with US, it's 50 to 52% below 2005 levels in 2030. For EU, it's a 55% reduction from 1990 levels by 2030. For India, in our updated NDC, it's 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. And for China, it's a 65% over 2005 levels by 2030. So moving forward, I think we'll get a little bit more into the EU targets, particularly when we're talking about CBAM, and of course, India. We're going over Indian regulations. So, does anyone have any questions as of now? Right. Okay. So then we can move ahead. So the next thing I'd like to talk about, since we're still talking at an international level, is the carbon border adjustment mechanism that's been announced. And talking about carbon border adjustment as a concept as well. Um, so let me go over the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism first. And also we can answer any questions if you have post that. So the EU has once they set their 2050 target, they set up a Green Deal within EU, basically a legislature to support internal carbon reduction. Post this, this became a climate law proposal, making the target binding within the EU. And in September 2020, we can see that they set up post their NDC commitment for 2030. In July 2021, they released a Fit for 55 package, basically a legal package, a legislature within EU, specifying how they would meet their 55% reduction by 2030. So these targets cover many sectors, a lot of direct and indirect actions that can support them in meeting their target. So one of these actions within the Fit for 55 package was CBAM, or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. This tied in to the EU ETS, which is the EU emissions trading system, which is an internal system within the EU, where organizations that is mostly larger organizations in the high emitting sectors uh, will have targets to reduce their emissions, and the organizations that can't meet their targets can purchase credits, in terms of credits being 1 ton of carbon, from other organizations who have exceeded their targets. So if an organization had a target of reducing 50% of emissions, and they have uh, reduced about 65%, that 15% of emission reductions can be sold to other organizations as in terms of carbon credit. The price is actually incentivizes early adopters. So if a new target comes in to achieve 70%, the organizations that achieve it quicker can further and go beyond that, can further benefit by getting additional revenue through the sale of those credits as well. So the idea being to incentivize early adopters of new technologies, green um, operation mechanisms, things like this, And this ties back to CBAM. So within the EU, a lot of organizations, a lot of sectors were finding it difficult to comply with these targets, and they uh, particularly cement, iron and steel, hydrogen, electricity. So these sectors um, were competing with with imports of the same products from outside of EU. So if these regulations were imposed on organizations within the EU, then their clientele would immediately uh, shift to purchasing these products from outside because they would become uncompetitive in the market. So for some time, they were figuring out how to go around this, and the solution was CBAM. The idea being that it's not just the organizations that are supplying goods within the EU, but any organization that is supplying goods to companies within the EU will have to be part of the same emission trading system. So if a vendor within the EU wants to sell steel to another organization within the EU, or if that same organization is looking to import the same steel, both the products would be taxed equally under the EU ETS scheme. So basically, the EU organizations would not be outcompeted by cheaper imports from outside. Of course, this doesn't take into account the fact that it is cheaper in other countries due to other reasons to manufacture goods. The idea being that the carbon tax imposed shouldn't become a barrier. And what does this mean for organizations that are supplying to the EU? So the first point is that, and I think I have a, yeah, yeah. So the first point is that the tax is on the importer. So the organization that wants to import the goods into the EU is the organization that has to pay the tax. Um, but the nuance comes that if there is a alternate supplier either somewhere else in the world or within the EU who has a very low carbon production system, they will not have no, the supplier will not have to pay the tax because the embodied carbon within the goods would be very low. So in this case, there is a competitive disadvantage to organizations that are not starting to decarbonize their operations because there is a new metric of comparison between different suppliers. So when will this come into effect? It's in fact already come. So there's two stages to it. The first stage is just reporting. So of course, CBAM is at many levels. It's being contested at the World Trade Organization. Many countries have filed cases. There's a lot of discussion going on. Also from the EU side, uh, there are a lot of loopholes in the current document that they have passed. A lot of particularities are also not specified. So they have put in a 3-year term. So uh, uh, from reporting to taxation, there is a gap within when the EU government is going to look into ratifying all the loopholes and making the system more robust. So, as per October 1st, any organization within the particular sectors, as I mentioned earlier, iron and steel, hydrogen, energy, uh, there are certain sectors that have been specified. So, any organizations that are supplying these products to the EU will have to already start reporting on their emissions embodied within the products they're supplying. As for India, it mainly, as of now, affects only the steel sector. Uh, the rest of our imports from the other sectors are very minimal. But as we move forward, so between 2026 to 2034, And this is not specified yet, but uh, between that time period, the EU has also mentioned that they will be adding new products and sectors into that list. So it's not too far from here. The worst case 10 years from now, but it could be that by 2026 they also ratify that, maybe also change the list and increase products that are in that list as well. Um, but one thing they have specified is, as per January 1st, 2034, any import into the EU would need to report on their embodied emissions and would be taxed on the same. Um, so this is specific to the EU CBAM regulations, just to give you an idea on what they are. Uh, but as I mentioned, two things. One, by 2026, this regulation could change a lot in terms of what sectors are included. So it makes sense for any organization who is supplying products to the EU to start preparing right now, at least in terms of quantifying their emissions and understanding what it would mean to reduce them over time. Of course, until the risk is economic risk is specified, maybe the amount of investment from an organization side to meet those targets can't be justified, but there is enough indication that there is a regulation coming, and most export-oriented organizations need to be preparing for it. Also, beyond this, other countries, so Canada, the United States, UK, Japan, South Korea, are also have also started talking about carbon border adjustment mechanisms, but the directives have not come out yet, as they have for EU CBAM. Uh, but any organization that's supplying to any of these countries should expect that within the few years they will have to report on their emissions as well. Um, so particular to CBAM, does anybody have any questions? So of course, you could put them in the chat box later on as well, and we can take them at the end of the session. So now I'd like to talk about India. So some uh, particular regulations that are coming up now that would be interesting for you all to be aware about. Um, so the history. So India signed to UNFCCC June 10th, 1992. They into Kyoto Protocol on 26th August 2002, Paris Agreement on 22nd April 2016. We have also submitted two NDCs. So the first was our initial NDC on 2nd October 2015, and then an updated one in August 2022. So I'm just going to specify what those two are. Um, so the first NDC specified that we would, from India side, we would like to reduce our emissions intensity by 33 to 35% below our 2005 levels by 2030. And this in our updated NDC in 2022 was increased from 35 to 45%. The second one being a conditional target, so 40% cumulative uh, renewable energy capacity um, by 2030. And in our updated NDC, this was increased to 50%. So now I'd like to also talk about some regulations that came out of this. So post setting our targets and signing on to um, the UNFCCC and Kyoto Protocol, India set up a national action plan on climate change. So in 2008, and it outlines the country's strategy on how it looks to tackle climate change. And it also establishes 8 national missions focusing on areas such as solar energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable agriculture. So under the National Action Plan on Climate Change, um, the National Solar Mission, so launched in 2010, it was a mission. It's a mission to promote the adoption of solar energy and achieve 100 gigawatt of solar capacity by 2022. The next one being the National Mission for Enhanced Energy Efficiency. This was implemented in 2010, and this mission focuses on improving energy efficiency in various sectors such as buildings, industry, agriculture, etc. And also includes initiatives such as energy supporting energy efficient appliances, energy labeling, energy conservation, mostly under the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. The next one being the FAME India scheme. So launched in 2015, FAME stands for Faster Adoption and Manufacturing of Hybrid and Electric Vehicles. And it's a scheme that aims to promote the adoption of electric and hybrid vehicles within the transport sector. And the last one being the Smart Cities mission. So started in 2015, the mission aims to develop 100 smart cities with focus on initiatives such as smart grids, energy efficient buildings, and advanced water management systems. Of course, within this list also includes India adopting CDM to allow for implementation of uh, projects from other developing countries um, using their funds, where the benefits of the emission reductions would go to them. But a huge amount of funds have come in for renewable energy projects at a large scale through the CDM mechanism. And this is a regulatory mechanism, and we'll get into what that means as well when we're talking about offsetting. Um, Also wanted to specify some indirect regulation that has come in various sectors due to our commitments from the power sector, industry, residential, agriculture, and transport sector, which are the main sectors of focus. A lot of it focuses on energy and renewable energy at that, along with energy efficiency in buildings. One I'd like to focus on is the PAT scheme. So as I spoke about the EU ETS scheme earlier, where uh, industries have targets as from a particular sector, and if they don't achieve it, they can either purchase credits from other organizations who have achieved their targets. And the PAT scheme is setting up something similar to that. So under BE, and it's something I've not included in my presentation today because it's not fully confirmed. But the similar to the PAT scheme, there's going to be an uh, climate like a trading platform, which is going to which is going to have industries sector-wise emission targets and organizations that are under the PAT scheme, organizations that are the best performers in that particular sector set the target, and other industries have to meet that target. So it's going to be on a similar way. In each sector, the best performers in terms of emission reductions will set the target, and all the other industries in the same sector will have to meet that target. This is something that is coming in, and once the details have been specified, I will go into that. But for now, I have two other mechanisms that have been proposed, and I'll go a little bit into those. Um, if any of you all want access to the detailed document that talks about each one of these policies and how they affect, how they propose to affect the decarbonization targets, I can share that with you. You can please get in touch with me. I'd be happy to. Um, so next thing I'd like to talk about is the Green Credits Program. So this is a regulation that has been announced under the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change. So the Green Credits Program is a voluntary mechanism. Unlike the CDM, it's a mechanism that allows for generation of voluntary credits and purchase of voluntary credits itself. And I will go into what exactly that means when I'm talking about offsetting. Um, So what is the Green Credit Scheme? So Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change has announced a Lifestyle for Environment, or LIFE, um, scheme, which is, and they announced this at the UN bilateral meeting in October 2022. So under this LIFE scheme, there are many activities that they propose to take up. One of them being the Green Credits Program, the other one being this EcoMark scheme. So today we're going to talk a little bit into the Green Credits Program because it has a direct effect on what we're talking about today. Um, EcoMark scheme talks about a list of products that, and uh, basically a scheme on for manufacturers on how they can report on the environmental impact of their products. The Green Credits Program is a voluntary carbon credits program, and we'll get a bit into that. So the dates, MOEF issued notification on the Green Credits Protocol, Green Credits Program in June 27, 2023, and officially launched it in October 13th, 2023. It's going to be implemented in two phases. The first one focusing water conservation and afforestation. The second one will go a lot more into detail with waste management, air pollution, mangrove conservation. And let me give you a little bit, I'll go into the details of that on my next slide. Just some details of the structure of the Green Credits Program. So the Green Credits Program is set up under the Indian Council of Forestry Research and Education, which is under the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change. And they will be the administrator of the program. As you can see in the diagram on the right, the administrator is in charge of a list of activities from appointing, the first one being appointing of a technical committee that decides on the science behind the activities and the structure behind the mechanism. Um, so the methodology for calculating credits and the mechanism for registration, verification, evaluation, measurement, and reporting. And the second thing being the administration will be responsible for establishing the Green Credits Registry. It's a registry where all the trades, the registered participants will be logged. And it also maintains the trading platform, which supports the trading of credits. And it also will appoint the designated agencies that will look into doing third-party verification of any documents that have been submitted. Yeah. So then going a little bit into the two phases. So under the Green Credits Protocol, the Green Credits Program, in the initial phase, afforestation and agriculture and water conservation will be focused on. And the second phase, they'll go more into mangrove conservation, restoration, the EcoMark label development to support organizations, air pollution reduction interventions, sustainable building and infrastructure, and waste management. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is the carbon credit trading scheme. So this, so within India right now, there's different objectives in terms of how the trading of carbon or emission reductions is going to be looked at, which is why we actually have three different mechanisms that are being formulated. Of course, they're all in the initial stages. As I mentioned, the first one by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, similar to the PAT scheme. The second one being the Green Credits Program. And the third one being the Carbon Credit Trading Scheme under the Ministry of Power. So the Gazette for this document was released on 28th June 2023, and it's publicly available. But I've summarized some activities under it in terms of how it's structured and what will be the objective. So please feel free to download the main document or get in touch with me. I can share it with you as well. So the governance of this Indian carbon market is under the oversight of a national steering committee, and this national steering committee and who will be the members of it is specified in the gazetted document. It's going to be under the Ministry of Power, and the initial selection process will be done by Ministry of Power. S- the Bureau of Energy Efficiency will be the administrator for the Indian carbon market, and the Grid Controller of India Limited shall be the registry platform for the Indian carbon market. The Central Electricity Regulatory Commission shall be the regulator for trading activities. Um, and the National Steering Committee for the Indian carbon market and other authorities should be developed, and the detailed procedures and operationalizing of the Indian carbon market will be specified soon, so that they have not yet specified how the functioning of this market will be. Um, Next thing I'd like to talk about is offsetting. Um, if anybody has any questions before I start this about the two regulations I spoke about before, you can add it into the chat. I can take it now. If not, I'll be going on to, yes. Um, the slide deck, I'm actually using a software, but I could share. Sorry, someone has asked if they can get the slide deck. I can share the recording of the presentation with you. It'll be shared with all the participants. So you can take it from there. But the slide deck in itself, I don't think I can share it in the form that it is right now. Okay. Vitika has asked what is the fundamental difference between between GCP and CCTS. So basically, the Green Credits program is a voluntary mechanism, meaning that it's mainly set up for individual organizations to uh, both set up projects that generate emission reductions or sequestration, and then generate the credits, and for similarly for individual organizations to purchase those credits to meet their targets. So this could be private sector, public sector, both, but from a voluntary standpoint. Versus the carbon credits trading platform will be for obligated entities, meaning for certain organizations that are by regulation obligated to purchase a certain number of credits. There are certain sectors in both public and private where organizations have national targets to to in terms of purchasing offsets. The main one being the energy sector. So both um, generators of electricity and distribution and transmission and distribution organizations, mostly public organizations, have certain targets that they need to meet in terms of purchasing of offsets. That can be either in terms of purchasing a certain amount of renewable energy into the mix, or it can be achieved through purchasing of credits through other activities as well. So, which is why CCTS is under the Ministry of Power, because they want to specify how the trading platform and have a little more control over how the trading platform is actually set up. I hope this answers your question. Of course, what voluntary and regulatory markets and a little bit into that I'll cover when I'm talking about offsetting. Any other questions? All right. So I think we can move ahead. So let's get into offsetting. Yeah. So uh, as you can see on your screen, The first thing, if we talk about carbon markets, there is generally a compliance carbon market and a voluntary carbon market. Of course, this is generic at a global level. Some countries have different names for it, different structures for it. But if we're talking about carbon markets and understanding carbon markets in general, there's a compliance carbon market, which is what I specified as the regulatory compliance carbon markets. The second one being the voluntary carbon markets. So compliance carbon markets include what I spoke about earlier, the EU ETS, where the uh, organizations of particular sectors by law have to meet certain targets. So they will have to do this under a compliance carbon market. Um, the second one being compliance offset programs. So um, like the CDM mechanism I told you earlier. There's also a California compliance offset program. There are programs like that. So these are basically between different countries, right? For countries to meet their targets mainly. The second one being the voluntary carbon markets. So this includes so very few government regulated voluntary carbon markets, although the green credits program, for example, is a government regulated program, which is quite rare. From 2006 till 2023, where we are right now, the voluntary carbon markets have been in India have been functioning completely in the private sector with organizations like Vera, Gold Standard, and I also go into that soon. So it's very few government regulated voluntary carbon markets around the world. But I guess India, considering the scale in terms of finances, in terms of um, um, regulation for quality of credits, etc., has taken a call to have a government regulated voluntary carbon market as well. So just to give you an idea, listed on the screen, some of the main projects. I think it covers almost everything in terms of types of projects that can be registered. Also, the some examples of voluntary carbon market platforms. I'm sure most of you have heard of Vera Gold Standard. Plan Vivo is also one, and I've also specified the UNFCCC CDM. Um, So the reason why there's so much talk around um, offsetting and the ethics around offsetting about new regulations coming in the space is because of the amount of finances that are actually involved, right? Um, so just in 2023, uh, India, internationally, there were $414 billion in terms of carbon credits transferred. Both, I mean, from including the voluntary and the regulatory markets, of course. But this amount of funding is large and has been to some degree, especially in the voluntary space, highly unregulated. And it's also seen that there's going to be a 31% annual growth. So that means by 2028, it's going to go up to $1,600 billion. And I think most countries and most governments are aware of this, and which is why they're trying to, one, see as much as possible how these funds can be used to their maximum potential with maximum efficiency and to support the right causes, right? And yeah, so from the private sector, just to put some numbers out there, so a document by Carbon Brief showed that 34 companies have used carbon credits to offset 38 million tons of carbon dioxide um, during 2020 to 2022. And this is equivalent to annual emissions of Ethiopia and Kenya combined, right? So this is a huge amount of carbon offsets. And you can see three companies, Shell, Volkswagen, Chevron, in themselves have supported like Shell and Volkswagen, nearly 10 million carbon credits or carbon units from their side. So it's a huge amount of funds, and many companies are using this as a form of penalty rather than looking internally into reducing their emissions, working on improving their efficiency, other processes, setting targets. They look at it as just a cost. If we purchase this amount of credits, we don't need to look into our own um, performance in terms of achieving targets, which is where, and this has been happening for a while, so which is where the idea of ethics actually comes into play. So, just 3 points. Many companies are relying heavily on carbon offsets rather than reduction. And a lot of the offsets in the market today can be of very poor quality. And I'll get into how to identify that as well. And it's difficult to measure the benefits that they really offer, right? So there are efforts underway to improve the quality of offsets, but also to create education, create awareness among suppliers, buyers in the market on how to identify good quality offsets, right? So ethical offsetting, and what does that really mean, right? So there are uh, certain guides that I can uh, show you today, and there are also certain regulatory uh, uh, um documents that have not yet been formed as regulation coming in terms of ethical offsetting. So the first thing I like to talk about, and this is something that you can reference, is the Oxford Principles for Net Zero Aligned Carbon Offsetting, right? So this is a document released by the University of Oxford on some ethical considerations, uh, both from organizations that are purchasing credits and from organizations that are developing credits, in terms of what good quality credits mean, and what really achieving net zero should mean, and how it should be done in an ethical way, right? Uh, just I've really put a brief of the points, and I'll go over them, but please do, document is available, and you can also reach out to me. I'd be happy to share it with you if you want to go into it in more detail, right? So the reason we're talking about offsetting ethics is, of course, a lot of concerns that have been coming up in the recent past about greenwashing. Um, and then the problem with greenwashing, our companies either rerouting funds back to themselves under the name of projects, or of supporting projects that don't really have impact on the ground. These kind of things can come back with negative impacts on the concepts of uh, initially from climate change to achieving targets, to the mechanisms of um, trading, and mechanisms that have been set up over last 25 years to support these activities, So rather than going down the blame game of saying that either offsets are good or bad, or certain organizations are good or bad, um, idea would be to see how we can create awareness in the market about which projects are good, which organizations are doing good work, what kind of uh, claims organizations can make in term, and how they can actually achieve net zero while um, not just in a ethical way, right? The first point, of course, is prioritizing reducing emissions first, and then looking at offsetting, and also when looking at offsetting, to ensure uh, the environmental integrity of the project or the quality of the project. And we'll go into how we do that also. The second one being shifting offsetting to carbon removal, where the offsets are directly removing carbon from the atmosphere. So a lot of reduction projects are slightly difficult to quantify versus carbon removal, which is nature-based solutions, afforestation, carbon capture, things like this are a lot more robust in terms of actually removing carbon from the atmosphere. And the market is also shifting towards purchasing these credits more. Second, the next point is shifting towards long-lived storage, right? So there's a concept here called short cycle carbon and long cycle carbon. So short cycle carbon being a tree dies after 20 years, right? So the carbon that was taken out of the atmosphere 20 years ago goes back into into the atmosphere, into the soil. Um, Versus fossil fuels, which have been out of our atmosphere, out of our ecology for millions of years. And now this carbon is being reintroduced into the ecosystem. So we have a limited amount of capacity in our ecosystem in terms of carbon, and the issue being that we can cycle the existing carbon but not introduce new carbon into the system. And if we are, and we have to reach development goals, etc., etc., we should be removing as much carbon out of the atmosphere uh, as we put into it. And this should be done permanently, right? Planting trees that are going to be cut 15 years later is a temporary solution. And climate change is not at a 20, 30-year level. It's been happening for the past 300 years, and it's going to get much worse as we move forward. So we need to look at solutions that are permanent. And there are certain projects that are coming up that are claiming at least that they can permanently remove carbon from the atmosphere. Like there are direct carbon capture technologies, etc., that are talking about permanent carbon removal from the atmosphere. Even biochar, there's certain projects, and you can look this up. The basic idea being that the carbon removed should be permanently removed from the atmosphere and not just temporarily removed. Yeah, so also support of the development of a market. So the marketplace should not just be a scapegoat for purchasing credits, but it should be in line with the overall net zero goals. That means that organizations also need to meet their overall goals of reducing their emissions as well as purchasing offsets, right? So those were, yeah. So the next thing I like to talk about is a regulation that supports with offsetting ethics. And this is the EU Green Claims Directive. So this is also something that's been more recently announced. Um, it's right now not yet a regulation, but it's going to be a regulation soon by the EU on how companies can make green claims, right? It's a regulation from the EU um, on how any organization within the EU can report on their environmental impact, or the environmental impact of the activities that they're taking out for this, right? So the idea being, so let me go over the history of it. So the Green Claims Directive was proposed in March 2023, and it is adopted by the EU Parliament and the EU Council member states, and will have a 2-year period to transpose into a legally binding or a actual legislation, right? And the exact date of when it will become legally binding for organizations within the EU is not yet specified, um, right? But keeping track of it, the directives requires companies to substantiate their voluntary green claims, right? So we spoke about the voluntary markets and voluntary mechanisms before. So a company that is not bound by regulation to offset their emissions or reduce their emissions, but is doing this because they voluntary, either from their either other stakeholders, either their clients or from the investors, are looking to meet certain targets and take up activities. Um, the companies will still and report on it. The companies will still need to substantiate these claims, meaning that they can't just put out there that we're net zero, for example, or that we have reduced 50% of our emissions without also putting out proof on how they've achieved these targets, or how they've achieved these claims, right? The second one being that from a compliance standpoint, that means any uh, uh, organization that's meeting a compliance or regulation will need to get a third party independent auditor to verify what claims that they're making. Right? Yeah, so the next one being environmental labeling schemes. So there are a lot of labeling schemes within the EU that for different environmental labels, either like EcoCert, there's so many different labels that organizations put on their bottles to show organic, from organic and fair trade and everything. Um, these kind of labels will have certain rules. So the labels themselves under the directive will have certain rules on how they will have to operate. And yes, as of now, a lot of these private labels don't actually have any regulatory backing. They're just based on um, uh, uh, individual organizations that are uh, maybe supplying documents, and then it's peer uh, related activities. That's it. So it's not really, although there are certain labels that we look at in terms of environmental assurance on products, it's not usually meeting any sort of actual on-ground impact, right? Um, then yeah. Um, yeah, so basically beyond that, it empowers the Commission to adopt delegated acts and sets requirements for communication. So it sets certain requirements for communication verification of claims from organization side. Um, yeah, I think that basically covers what the Green Claims Directive entails. Of course, there is a lot of nuance to this as well, and I can share the Green Claims Directive document with you as well. So the last thing, as we're also running a little late, the last thing I'd like to talk about is awareness, especially from organization standpoint in terms of purchasing credits. What you can look at in order to be aware of what is a high quality uh, credit and what's a low quality credit. Um, so two perspectives. One is the supplier side, meaning the supplier side being the organizations that develop the credits. So from a supplier side perspective, organizations that are developing credits need to look into these particular aspects on the screen. These are from the core carbon principles. So the core carbon principles specify the first one being additionality, meaning that the finances that are coming for this project need to be additional to existing activities. The permanence, as I mentioned before, the carbon removed should be permanently removed. Um, and we can go into each one of these, but basically, ethical points for organizations that are setting up or developing projects. But going now into the buyer side perspective, so from an organization that's looking to purchase credits, um, so uh, the 6 points here I'll specify as I go over some projects, right? The first one being which organization you're purchasing from, what is the level of documentation that they have done on the project, what methodology have they used to quantify the credits or the carbon removals or reductions, who is doing the verification and validation, and looking into the verification and validation documents. Vintage, meaning when the project was started and when the credits were, when the project was started, registered on the platform, and when the credits were issued. And the last one being additional claims. So beyond environmental, do they have any social or other claims that they have? And how are those substantiated, right? So I've just put some examples out here from off the Vera website. So this is what a project looks like on Vera. Um, Not to call out any particular organization or project, but so what you can see on the side here um, the project ID, the state which it's in, the proponent, meaning the organization that set up the project, then the project status, whether it's registered or not, the estimated annual emission reductions, in terms of how much carbon has been reduced through this project. Then if you see the VCS project validator, who's the organization that has done the third-party verification validation for this project. And below that, you see the project registration date, and then you see the crediting period and term. The project registration date is when the project was registered on the platform, and it usually uh, has a certain time period from the initial crediting period to when the product was registered. Could be the other way around as well. In this particular case, the crediting period, so the project started in 2022 before the project was registered on the platform as well. So a certain set of activities are backtracked. The project is also for a 7-year period, right? So this is the first thing to look into. And from this, in the same page as well, if you scroll down, you will see a list of documents here. So this list of documents are the public documents from the project proponent side. So one will be of the project registration document. So one is how the project is designed. So project design document will specify what the methodology for quantification of carbon is, what are the additional activities, permanence, and all of these are specified in this project design document. So you can look into that, and it'll give you a better understanding of how what is actually gone into the project and how the project is implemented. The second one uh, being you will find here also the verification validation documents. So the third party organization that comes to verify whether the claims made are actually on ground, they will have to release a document signed by them on whether these claims actually uh, are validated through the project or not. And these documents are public as well, so you can look into those as well. Um, yeah, so this is just an example, a project which has most documents available. Uh, Verification, validation documents, the project design documents are all publicly available. Also, stakeholder consultation. Most of the documents are available. You can go through it, but just from a glance, you can see that most of the documents are transparently available itself as the first step. Um, but another project, just as a example, you will see uh, l- uh, although there are few documents here, the project registration document is not available. Third-party verification validation document is not available. Uh, so they have a public comments, so public stakeholder consultation, but you'll see many documents of projects that are registered, which many pages of projects are registered, which don't have any documents available. So you can find out that maybe they're not so transparent in their approach. So you can also look into that as a method to understand the quality of the project. So in most cases, when from an organization standpoint, if you're purchasing credits, do look into the project one step beyond that. Download the project design, look for the methodology. How have they quantified the carbon? Have they actually done some tests of the soil? Have they actually used a valid scientific methodology? You can also contact consultants. This is something we do also from our side for other organizations, um, to assess the quality of credits, whether the impact in terms of the finances that they're paying are actually going to the project on ground, to actually reducing carbon, or are they going along the way to multiple different people who are really not who are acting as middlemen rather than implementing the project, right? Um, so with this, I think we're quite done with time, so I think I'll end it over here. Uh, I've tried to cover a wide variety of topics, so I think I might have missed out on some things, but please uh, reach out to me if you have any um, particular questions. You can also check out our website, orwellconsulting.com. We do a lot of consulting work from with public sector, private sector organizations. We support companies in understanding where they are right now, support hand-holding them in creating awareness within their organization. What are the basics that they need to understand in terms of um, uh, starting out their climate journey. So we will be happy to help you as well. So question, Akshata has a question. While all the processes help track accountability, it seems like it may enable delay of climate action. What may be things we can do to ensure both accountability and higher uh, quantitative and qualitative climate action? Okay, that's a very nice question. Thank you, Akshata. So yeah, it's true that there is a lot of legislature and a lot of big organizations along the way, and it could delay climate action, and we do need it. We do need to act quickly where we are right now today. Um, what can we do? So I mean, of course, there's two perspectives from a national or state level perspective. Of course, there are actions going on, but the lack of clarity and in the focus still being on economics as a priority, development as a priority, uh, over sustainable development or additional economic mechanisms is, I think, the gap. Um, what we can do, of course, for sure, awareness. Please do join more uh, presentations from people who are working in the field like us, because there can be certain things you can do from your organization side, wherever you have influence, or from your personal in your personal life to influence where we move forward from here. Um, but I don't think the solution is to move hastily. There have been times in the past where we have done that, and it's led to low quality projects or no impact. Things like that have happened because of the haste of action. So it's not necessary that we need to move quickly, but we need to move effectively and with accountability, as you mentioned. So hopefully, from a regulatory standpoint, concepts like ethics get embodied and become part of uh, uh, awareness within the administrative bodies of the government. And this is something we're trying to support with workshops for different government departments on what is climate change, how it affects different sectors or different activities. So this is something that needs to develop. And yeah, if you have within your capacity some space to share this knowledge and push it forward, I think that is what we can do effectively, at least right now. I hope that answered your question. It was very a question at a very big scale. Um, Thank you, Akshata. Yes, absolutely. Please do reach out to me. Um, what will be the base? So Chetan has a question. What will be the baseline that we will be adopted by CBAM? Same EU ETS cap and trade scheme. Um, yeah. So currently the sectors that they're in terms of CBAM, the sectors that they're implementing CBAM on don't have any are not part of the EU ETS market right now because of this. So right now they want to bring in those sectors along with the sectors internationally. So they have specified also in certain documents what is the percentages. Like every few years it's going to be increased. It's not that the tax will be on 100% of the goods. There will be certain caps. So like there'll be a 30% reduction in the first year, then will be subsequently 5% every year till 2036, for example. So 100%, it's not that in 2026, the organizations that are supplying goods will have to pay 100% tax, tax on 100% of the emissions, but it'll be on a certain percentage, and that percentage will keep increasing as it moves forward. If you, Chetan, if you get in touch with me, I'll share. I have the document from the EU that specifies what percentage for what sector in which year. I can share that with you.
All right. Yeah, we'll end the presentation here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.